All right, so it's been a little bit. I'm still working on the E7s, now covered in aluminum. I'm still working on a full-length how-to video for the E7s. Where was I on that? I think I last left off on doing the valve guide shaving segment. And then I have a few more things to do with that, so I'll get there eventually. I've just been a little busy. And I finally got a non-ferrous carbide burr for aluminum. So that's what we were working on, is some non-ferrous aluminum. Because I have made the mistake in the past of using a double cut burr on aluminum. Sometimes I like to jump around and I need a little bit of a break, so you can see what happens to your double cuts or not. This will still totally cut, it's just lost like a portion. You can't really tell in the camera actually. Or did all of the aluminum just... No, there we go. So there's some flat spots on it, but it'll still do the rest of the job. But for aluminum you have a single cut, and there's something really pleasing about porting aluminum. I don't know why. But with the single cut, like, it's just... I don't know, I feel like iron is a little bit harsher. So it's just kind of a more pleasing experience for some reason. But no, I just wanted to take a bit of a break, and I had the plenum out, and I wanted to change some things. Like, I had to finish opening the throttle body ports for the BBK 61 millimeter. So I was kind of changing that, and obviously I did like some dimpling experiments, but I wanted to show what I was working on because I wanted to kind of plug YouTuber Mr. I think it's Mr. Blitzkrieg 1987. I had to just double check his username because he was like actually really helpful, at least for my lower, where I couldn't really find a lot of information. And initially I didn't do a lot with my intake outside of well, you're not going to be able to see it in the dark. There's my F7 with a dented gas tank. She just turned 50 this year. But my plenum, like I said, I'm working... It does still have dimpled roof and floor, and I've smoothed out the sides, and I'm working on a dogleg, but the only thing done with that, like, it is gasket matched, because that is smaller than the lower, so I opened those up like a couple of inches to the lower, and like, unless you can cut one of those things open, that's all you can do. But I feel like once the lower has its cuts and the upper has like like, you really need the BBK 58 or 61. Like, the 61's more for the 5.8 351. Actually, there's a stock throttle body. I shouldn't be piling stuff on that poor bike, but anyway, so basically the only other thing you can do is cut it open and weld it at the top there. So basically just opening those elbows, and my approach is taking the inside radius, like the dog leg, a little bit out of that, and just kind of, I really just port matched it to the throttle body, and then the bottom of those, and that's still a lot of material to come into the lower here. Now, the thing is, you can see all the turns from here, and I don't have like the runner numbers, like I don't even remember the firing sequence. Like, one of these is runner 1, but it doesn't matter. Like, you can get an idea of how gnarly some of these turns are, especially this one with the sensor inside of it. But anyway, so it's hard to get information from certain people, and that's why I started doing this stuff on my channel, because certain people will have bits and pieces of free information. I was like, well, in this one I'm not trying to show anyone, like, I'm gonna plug him because I think his demonstration was really good. So I'm not gonna this isn't a demo. I'm just kind of showing what's going on and what I did, and then you can go watch him to get further information. But so what you have are these really nasty dog legs, which this one is now cut away, and I did the math on it, sort of. When I say sort of, it's because my inside caliper won't get in. Like, it's opened up now, so it hits the arms before the feet can kind of get on it. But I measured the other side. This pinch I measured at about 826 thousandths. This one, I could only open it so far, and then I just guesstimated to about a 970 thousandths. So 26, like 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, that's 40 on top of 100, so about just over an eighth of an inch. So 25 thousandths or 20 thousandths over an eighth of an inch. And again, like, here's an eighth of an inch to give you an idea of how much space is open in there. Like, obviously I could set the caliper back to 826, but it's a nice little chunk. So I was kind of thanking him for showing that, because I feel like that is realistically, like he said, a porter did that when he had an intake ported, and obviously you can kind of, if you're familiar with a stock casting, it's not that difficult to see what's changed. And I know a lot of people, like, you know, they have a business. I have one particular guy I always bug, and he's always like really apprehensive, and I'm like, dude, these are basically junkyard engines, you know, where, like, yeah, like my build, I'm competitive with the stock castings, but the power that I'm making comes in a brand new Ford Expedition. Like, even the Raptor's more powerful now. Like, so I kind of am under the belief that a community should kind of like help each other out if they're on a budget, you know, and they want to have some fun. And this stuff is really interesting, and it's cool to do. You know, a lot of people consider this stuff throwaway. I know, like, the truck plenum and intake, I've seen, like, if those business guys are only doing what I'm doing, then you're talking about like mid 200s on their, before they're cutting open to weld. Like, opening it up and welding, they get close to 300, which is actually pretty nuts. But if I can open this up and I'm doing this all proper, I mean, this is definitely exceeding a GT40 by a decent little chunk. But basically, the key is, in these really extreme runners, to get to those dog legs. Like, look at this one, too. And obviously, these are upside down. That's the injector hole there, but you can see how they're basically cut back to where, when you're looking in the port, you can't even see them anymore. The problem is, without having like a sonic tester or whatever whatever it's called, I don't know the wall thickness, but if you kind of use your finger and feel up there, like, I'd assume even more material can come off of there. But what ends up happening is, I feel like a good rule of thumb is this wall here just kind of blends into what's in front of it, and you should be safe. Like, so you're basically just shaping that out. See where you start to get like carbon, and that's, again, that's opened by well over an eighth of an inch, like at the pinch toward the roof. Same over here, and then I did open this one too. This one has a little bit of a dog leg, and let me see, I don't think I vacuumed yet. But look at how much metal, well, now it's all smushed, but that was a huge pile. You can see also how it's partially dimpled and stuff, and this was before, like, I did that without thinking, if you are going to dimple, that it shouldn't necessarily be in a high-speed area, it should only be in, like, dead zones. So when I dimpled this thing, and I'll probably smooth it out, and I did it right on the ramps going in and down where that's going to be a lot of velocity, so I may leave dimples on the side, but I started to smooth the corners. So here's the only thing, though, is, like, obviously, yeah, let me just scratch up your chambers. So the only thing that concerns me is, yes, to get the power I want, I need that CFM. Like, I need to try to get as close to that mid 200 as I can. So the whole engine is all in balance and doing what the cam is asking it to do. But the thing is, like, this long runner truck manifold has long runners for greater velocity for low end power. That's why it was in the trucks, right? And the trucks had not a bad amount of torque, quite honestly. Like, that's still like a decent little engine, but they made like 270 foot-pounds, which probably a modern V6 sedan doesn't even have that much. Well, maybe now, but that's still a decent little amount of torque if that were in a car. And, or maybe even like an STI or something is probably around that, or maybe a little more with the, I don't know what size their turbos are or what their like area ratio is, but anyway, they made 270 foot-pounds at like 2400 RPM. Like, that's how low of an RPM it's peaking at because of how the long runner. So something to keep in mind is, like, you know, you may see people that are competitively porting to the point where they'll weld that and open up as much as possible, and that might be for like a Mustang or something with high-end power, because inherently as you're opening things up, you're changing port flow, potentially losing some velocity, and that's the only thing to keep in mind. The only build that I've seen this intake on, like with the dual throttle body, and they had the stock throttle body, which is probably choking it up, but it was a 347, and because of the lower intake being ported, they expanded their RPM range was now at like 3600. So it's something to keep in mind, that once you start porting this, you're probably expanding that. And then there's things from there, like this intake would be massive with a phenolic spacer, but it makes it closer to the Edelbrock Performer they make in this version. And then, what else? Like, you know, like maybe a throttle body spacer could help lower the RPM peaks. And the only other thing about this intake with the long runners is it inherently wants to fall off. Well, probably, I forget what the peak horsepower was on the truck, like, but it was 185. And I don't even think it was at 5,000. Then at 5,000, these kind of fall off. So porting it, like, you may expand it to, like, you know, a quarter over 5,000, maybe mid 5,000. But what I'm looking at with my build and running software is looking at my, there's two things I have to worry about. Is number one, now the dynamics of my runners changing to potentially change where the power band is, but also if I should advance my cam either 4 degrees or 6 degrees, because the long runner could potentially make that 4 degrees more like a 6 degree. The problem with that is I have a Street Fighter, TCI Street Fighter stall converter with a anti-balloon plate, which is kind of overkill, but at least it's in there now. Which with this duration cam, and I don't know, I think with a heavier vehicle your stall would be higher, but that's like a 3,000 to 3,400. So the last thing I want to do is have, like, let's say, like, yeah, this would be, if this were still going to peak its torque at like 2,500, that wouldn't be an ideal converter. Like, yeah, it would still get up and get going, but basically I think that my stall speed, because your stall speed is supposed to be like slightly lower than your peak torque, but I'm basically, it's going to be launching and flashing probably at the peak torque, depending on how much this ends up opening. But by opening this up, it kind of simulates a little bit more of a shorter runner, probably not a whole lot. Like, I still think inherently there's definitely more velocity with the size of that plenum than, say, like a GT40 or like a Mustang style plenum. But yeah, the truck lower is like, actually the Holly lower is actually the same as this, but as far as these dog legs and bends, like the design is just like kind of absurd. So but for a van build, this is the exact, like, you definitely wouldn't want to change from the dual throttle body unless you're certain that you could get more torque somehow else, or if maybe you had a stroker and it was a non-issue. Like the stroker that I saw with a 347 and this intake in EFI was actually making like 425 foot-pounds at 36, and it was still making 400 foot-pounds at 25. Like, that is just like like numbers change, like because of overhead cams having they don't have the velocity necessarily, especially like us, something like an E7 with little valves or even slightly bigger valves is still a lot of velocity potentially on the table. So you have an E7 408 Windsor or something like that. Like, well, by then you'd probably upgrade your heads, but it would probably make a decent amount of torque. Like 500 foot-pounds is not out of the question to be able to do fairly easily. I'm sure. I'm hoping to get as close to 400 foot-pounds on this build as possible, but anyway, so I just wanted to thank him, and I'll plug his channel, so everyone's kind of getting their due there. But you'll see how his technique is, and it's pretty simple to do. And like I said, these guys with businesses that are pretending like they have all these secrets, that's not really a secret. Like, just looking at it, because I have one guy that's always like, oh, you're gonna lose. Like, you have to really do some bad stuff to lose significant CFM. Like, even if you're doing your first E7s, I feel like you really have to do a bad job to not just pick up power. You know what I mean? It's when you hit a plateau and then you make a potential error that you're now minimizing the most possible gain. Like, there's a sweet spot, basically. So I am curious to know, like, how far that could open, but like I said, I think, and also from Mr. Blitzkrieg's video, it looked like his were basically the same. I may have even gone like a touch further, but if you just follow that back wall, it seems like the best you can do. I should show you a top-down view, because they are tricky to blend. I don't mind my honeycomb intake, but if you look to the left, see, once you get on the inside, depending on the burr you have, like, there can be some, so you got to do a lot of blending. And keep in mind that pinch is like on the roof, so it's actually kind of hard to see from here. And then, see, I've got to blend that a little bit more. But you see how that goes right into the wall. It's like pretty obvious. So got to clean these things up. This is a really good paint, by the way. I use my plenum. I have to repaint the heads, and I only have like a week of weather that's warm enough to really cure paint like that. But I use VHT, and this stuff is like incredibly sticky and firm. It's like spray painting, like with Pour 15 is the only other paint I have that's similar. But yeah, this is kind of funny. I don't think it would really hurt, and it's only partially dimpled, but I think it was kind of dumb to do it where it's going to definitely be high speed. And then in the plenum, I also did it, so I think overall these are still going to make that much more flow than stock, but worst case scenario, the little dimplings, if they hurt it, it would only be by a couple of CFM, and if they help it, it would only be by a couple, but I don't know, because I didn't really know what you could do with this until I was like, oh yeah, the dog legs, I didn't know. You'll be amazed at how much metal, like, it's freaking everywhere, but you'll be amazed at how much metal can actually come off of that without breakthrough. And I definitely think, 826 to 970, like, 150 thousandths coming off is definitely going to make some airflow. Initially, I only took 66 thousandths off, and I was like, oh, that should help it. And then I was like, no, I can go further, and I just kept, crossing my fingers that I wasn't going to break through, but I'm pretty sure those are still probably fairly thick, so. Anyway, so yeah, go check out if you're seeing this, go check out, it's Mr. Blitzkrieg 1987, and I'll put his channel in my description so you can see how to cut it. And then, like I said, my next thing, hopefully soon, I'll have the full E7 how-to video up. So, see you later.